The Galactic Hegemony discovered Earth on a routine survey mission 300 years ago. The scanning ships passed through the solar system, took their readings, and marked humanity as a pre-spaceflight species. The report filed that day used words like primitive and contained. The Council read it, nodded, and moved on to more important matters. For 3 centuries, Earth remained a footnote in the vast records of the hegemony. Humanity built their cities, fought their wars, and dreamed of the stars while alien eyes watched from a distance. The watchers were patient. They had seen thousands of species climb toward the sky. Most never made it. Those who did were easy to control. Everything changed when humanity finally cracked the puzzle of faster-than-light travel. The achievement was crude by galactic standards. Human ships used massive fusion reactors that burned too hot and drove too hard. But they worked. Within months, the first human vessel crossed the light barrier and emerged in deep space, broadcasting their arrival to anyone listening. The hegemony responded swiftly. A diplomatic fleet appeared in orbit around Earth within days. Ambassador Vex Thor stepped off his shuttle onto humanity's first orbital station, with the confidence of someone who had done this 100 times before. He smiled at the nervous human delegation and began his practice speech about joining the galactic community. The treaty he offered seemed generous at first glance. Protection from hostile species, access to trade routes, a voice in the council. But buried in the dense text were the real terms. Humanity would pay taxes on all resources extracted from their system. They would accept hegemony law as supreme over their own governments. Most importantly, they were forbidden from building military vessels larger than frigate class. Earth's leaders gathered in emergency sessions. Some argued for refusal, but Vex Thor made the consequences clear. His fleet waiting in orbit included 3 dreadnoughts, each one capable of glassing an entire continent. The choice, he explained politely, was between partnership and pacification. Faced with ships they could not match and weapons they could not counter, humanity signed the treaty. Admiral Sarah Chen attended the signing ceremony in her dress uniform. She stood at attention while Earth's Secretary General put pen to paper, her face showing nothing. But inside, her mind was already at work. She had spent her career studying military history, from ancient naval battles to the wars that had nearly destroyed Earth. One lesson appeared again and again across the centuries. Treaties written at gunpoint never lasted. After the ceremony, she watched Vex Thor's fleet depart. The dreadnoughts moved with the slow confidence of absolute power. Their hulls gleamed with energy shields. Their weapons could strike targets halfway across a solar system. Chen studied every detail through the station's telescopes, committing the designs to memory. Then she made a call to Earth's military command. The meeting happened in a secure bunker deep beneath the Pacific Ocean. Chen stood before a table of generals and civilian leaders, her presentation already loaded on the screens. She began with a simple question. Did anyone truly believe the hegemony had humanity's best interests at heart? The room remained silent. She nodded and continued. Her analysis covered 3 main points. First, the hegemony's treaty turned Earth into a resource colony with no real autonomy. Second, their military restrictions ensured humanity could never challenge their control. Third, history showed that empires only respected strength. If humanity wanted to survive as a free species, they needed to build weapons the hegemony would fear. One of the generals asked the obvious question. How could humanity possibly build a battleship without the hegemony noticing? Chen smiled. The answer lay in the outer solar system, far from the trade routes and monitoring stations. She brought up an image of Kuiper Belt Object 2087X, an irregular asteroid tumbling through the frozen dark beyond Neptune's orbit. The asteroid was mostly iron and nickel, worthless by hegemony standards but perfect for human purposes. It was large enough to hollow out and convert into a construction facility. Its location put it months away from Earth by conventional drive, too far for casual inspection. Most importantly, the hegemony had never bothered to survey it in detail. To them, it was just another chunk of frozen rock. Chen outlined her plan. They would establish what appeared to be a scientific research station on the asteroid. The official purpose would be studying long-term effects of deep space on human biology. Meanwhile, the real work would happen inside the hollowed interior. Mining equipment would extract raw materials. Fabrication facilities would shape them into components. Assembly bays would piece together humanity's first true warship. The proposal drew immediate objections. The cost would be enormous. The risk of discovery was constant. If the hegemony found out, their response would be devastating. Chen acknowledged each concern, then asked another simple question. What was the alternative? Living as subjects forever? Hoping the hegemony would eventually grant them true independence? The historical record suggested otherwise. After hours of debate, the vote came down. The margin was narrow, but the decision was clear. Humanity would build its battleship. They would name her Indomitable. Chen left the meeting with authorization to begin immediately. She had 3 years to complete the project before the hegemony's next comprehensive inspection of Earth's orbital facilities. Within weeks, the first transport ships departed for the Kuiper Belt. They carried mining equipment, construction materials, and several thousand volunteers who understood they might never see Earth again. The official story described a bold scientific endeavor to establish humanity's first permanent deep space habitat. The hegemony monitors noted the mission and filed it under civilian exploration. Nothing about it seemed threatening. Chen watched the first ships vanish into the dark and felt the weight of what she had started. If her plan succeeded, humanity might win its freedom. If it failed, the hegemony would crush Earth's independence completely. There would be no second chances. She turned away from the viewport and began working on the technical specifications for Indomitable's weapon systems. The hegemony had ruled the galaxy for 10,000 years. Their dreadnoughts enforced their will across 1,000 systems. No client species had ever successfully challenged their authority. But they had never faced humanity before. They did not understand the stubborn refusal to accept defeat that defined human history. They would learn soon enough. The first ships reached Kuiper Belt Object 2087X after a 3-month journey through the cold dark beyond Neptune. The asteroid tumbled slowly through space, a misshapen chunk of metal and ice 12 kilometers across. To the crews that arrived, it looked like the most desolate place in the solar system. To Admiral Chen, watching from Earth through encrypted transmissions, it looked like freedom. The construction crews went to work immediately. Massive drilling machines bit into the asteroid's surface, excavating tunnels that spiraled inward toward the core. The extracted material was valuable. Iron, nickel, platinum, and rare earth metals all went into storage for later use. Within 6 months, the asteroid was hollow. They called the empty space inside the forge. Chief Engineer Marcus Webb oversaw the transformation of the cavern into a functioning shipyard. He was a compact man with gray hair and hands scarred from decades of industrial work. Before joining the project, he had built everything from orbital stations to fusion reactors. But nothing in his career compared to the challenge of constructing a battleship inside a spinning rock at the edge of the solar system. The interior of the forge became a small city. Living quarters were carved into the walls. Hydroponics bays provided food. Fusion reactors supplied power. Tens of thousands of workers lived and worked in the artificial gravity created by the asteroid's spin. They were volunteers all, people who understood they might spend years away from home for a ship that might never fight. Webb studied the hegemony's ship designs obsessively. The recordings from Vexthor's fleet revealed their tactical philosophy. They relied on energy shields to deflect attacks while their plasma weapons wore down enemy defenses. Their ships were elegant, curved, and built for speed. Combat typically happened at long range, where their superior sensors gave them an advantage. Indomitable would be nothing like that. Webb's design philosophy came from a simple observation. Humanity could not match the hegemony's technology. Their energy shields were centuries more advanced. Their sensors could detect ships across entire star systems. Their manufacturing capacity dwarfed anything Earth could produce. Trying to beat them at their own game would fail. Instead, Indomitable would exploit their weaknesses. Hegemony ships had thin hulls because their shields provided protection. Webb designed Indomitable with armor plates 2 meters thick in critical areas. The weight would make her slow, but kinetic weapons would have trouble penetrating. Plasma fire would char the outer layers but not reach the interior. For weapons, Webb rejected plasma technology entirely. Instead, he designed railgun batteries that could accelerate solid projectiles to 3% the speed of light. At that velocity, tungsten carbide slugs would punch through energy shields like they were not there. The shields were designed to deflect energy, not stop physical objects moving at relativistic speeds. The missile systems were equally unconventional. Hegemony point defenses relied on plasma bursts to destroy incoming projectiles. Webb designed missiles that released clouds of tungsten flechettes before reaching point defense range. Each cloud contained millions of razor-sharp fragments moving too fast to track individually. They would shred smaller ships and damage larger ones. The construction took 2 full years. Slowly, Indomitable took shape in the cavernous interior of the forge. Her hull was angular and brutal, nothing like the smooth curves of hegemony vessels. She looked like what she was, a weapon built by a species that understood violence. Webb walked the construction bays daily, inspecting every weld and checking every system. The project nearly ended during the 2nd year. Hegemony Inspector Qualvin arrived at Earth orbit unannounced for a surprise inspection of all human facilities. The official reason was routine compliance checking. The real reason, Chen suspected, was that the Hegemony had noticed unusual resource shipments leaving Earth. They were looking for unauthorized military construction. Qualvin's inspection covered every orbital facility around Earth. His scanning, ships probed every station and satellite. Chen watched the inspections with her heart hammering. If Qualvin decided to check the Kuiper Belt research station, the project would be discovered. The Hegemony's response would be immediate and overwhelming. At the forge, Webb received the alert and ordered an immediate shutdown of all non-essential systems. The massive fusion reactors powered down to minimal levels. Construction stopped. Workers retreated to their quarters and waited in silence. The only systems running were life support and basic station keeping. From space, the asteroid would look like a barely functioning research outpost. Qualvin's scans swept through the outer solar system. His ship's sensors detected the forge's energy signature and flagged it for review. Chen held her breath as the inspector studied the readings. The power output was low but present. Qualvin's report noted unusual ice formation patterns around the asteroid, likely caused by venting from the human research station. He marked it as a curiosity but not a concern. Primitive human technology was always inefficient. The inspection ended after 2 weeks. Qualvin departed Earth orbit satisfied that humanity remained in compliance with the treaty. His report concluded that while human resource usage was somewhat higher than expected, this was consistent with their inefficient industrial processes. No unauthorized military construction was detected. The Hegemony Council read the report and dismissed Earth from their concerns. At the forge, workers waited 3 days after Qualvin's departure before resuming operations. Webb restarted the reactors and brought the construction bays back online. The delay had cost them 2 weeks of work, but they had survived. Chen sent a coded message congratulating the crew on their discipline. The message ended with a reminder. They had 1 year to finish Indomitable before the next scheduled inspection. The final year of construction proceeded with brutal intensity. Webb pushed the crews to their limits. Shifts ran 16 hours. Sleep became a luxury. Mistakes were unacceptable because there was no time to fix them. The workers understood what was at stake. They were building humanity's one chance at freedom. Failure was not an option. Indomitable grew toward completion. Her railgun batteries were installed and tested. Her missile tubes were loaded with the first production warheads. Her armor was complete. 2.3 kilometers of layered alloy plate that could withstand hits that would vaporize other ships. Her reactors were brought online one by one, each one capable of powering a small city. 3 months before the scheduled completion date, Chen traveled to the forge for the first time. The journey took 12 weeks. When she finally stepped aboard Indomitable, walking through corridors that smelled of fresh metal and recycled air, she felt something she had not felt in years. Hope. This ship could work. It might actually work. She stood on the bridge with Webb and looked at the main view screen. From here, they could see the forge's interior, the massive construction bays that had birthed humanity's first real warship. Webb asked if she wanted to say anything to the crew. Chen activated the shipwide channel and spoke simply. In 3 months, they would find out if this gamble had been worth it. Either way, they had built something the Hegemony thought impossible. The final weapon tests happened in the weeks that followed. Railgun slugs were fired at target drones, vaporizing them instantly. Missiles streaked across the dark, their guidance systems tracking with inhuman precision. Point defense grids created kill zones that nothing could pass through alive. Every system performed exactly as designed. Indomitable was ready for war. But before they could celebrate, the message arrived from Earth. A Hegemony patrol fleet had entered the solar system unannounced. Commander Zethrak was demanding immediate inspection of all human facilities, including the Kuiper Belt Research Station. Intelligence suggested humans might be harboring refugees from the recent Kryn rebellion. Refusal to comply would result in punitive sanctions. Chen read the message 3 times, her mind racing through options. They could power down again and hope Zethrak did not investigate too closely, but this time the commander would not be satisfied with distant scans. He would send inspection teams aboard. They would discover everything. The alternative was to reveal Indomitable now, before she was fully ready. Before the crew had completed all their training, she looked at Webb. The engineer met her gaze steadily. He knew what she was going to decide. They had not come this far to surrender now. Chen nodded once and gave the order. Drop the camouflage. Power up all systems. Prepare for combat. Then she opened a channel to Zethrak's flagship and delivered humanity's Declaration of Independence. The galaxy would never be the same. Commander Zethrak sat in the command chair of his flagship, the dreadnought Eternal Judgment, and reviewed the intelligence reports from the Sol system. The humans had been model subjects for 3 years since signing the Annexation Treaty. They paid their taxes on time. They followed hegemony law. Their military consisted of small patrol craft that posed no threat to anyone. Still, something about this system made him uneasy. The resource consumption was higher than projections suggested. Ships departed for the outer system regularly, supposedly carrying scientists to a research station. The explanations were reasonable, but Zethrak had not survived 2 centuries of military service by ignoring his instincts. He decided to conduct a thorough inspection himself. His fleet consisted of 3 dreadnoughts, including his flagship, 8 heavy cruisers, and 20 frigates for screening duties. More than enough force to handle any conceivable threat from a client species. The humans had maybe 24 patrol boats total, armed with chemical missiles that could barely scratch modern shielding. This would be routine. The fleet entered the Sol system and made for Earth orbit. Zethrak transmitted his demands to the human government. All facilities would be inspected immediately, including the Kuiper Belt Research Station. Any resistance would be met with force. He expected quick compliance. The humans always complied. They had no choice. The response came not from Earth's government but from someone claiming to be Admiral Sarah Chen. Zethrak did not recognize the name. He pulled up her file, a human military officer. Insignificant rank by hegemony standards. She held no real authority. Yet her message was transmitted on military encryption and directed personally to him. The message was brief. Humanity declined his inspection. Their facility in the Kuiper Belt was sovereign territory. Any attempt to approach it without permission would be considered an act of war. Zethrak read the message twice, certain he had misunderstood. Then he felt anger rise in his chest. A client species was refusing direct orders. This was unacceptable. Before he could compose a response, his tactical officer interrupted with an alert. Unknown energy signatures were appearing in the Kuiper Belt. Something massive was powering up. The sensors struggled to classify it at first. Then the data resolved and appeared on his display. A ship, an enormous ship, larger than any human vessel on record by an order of magnitude. Zethrak stared at the readings in disbelief. The vessel's mass exceeded 2 million tons. Its power output suggested reactors equivalent to those on hegemony dreadnoughts. This was impossible. The treaty explicitly forbade military vessels above frigate class. Yet the evidence was undeniable. The humans had built a battleship. He opened a channel to Chen's ship. His translator converted his words into human language, though it struggled to convey his mixture of shock and fury. This was a direct violation of the Annexation Treaty. Humanity had signed an agreement forbidding this exact scenario. The consequences would be severe. The entire planet would face sanctions. Chen's face appeared on his screen. She looked calm, almost relaxed. When she spoke, her words were clear and measured. The treaty had been signed under duress, she explained. Earth had been threatened with orbital bombardment if they refused. Such agreements had no legitimacy. Humanity was renegotiating terms. Starting now, Zethrak felt his anger shift into something colder. This was not just a treaty violation. This was rebellion. The hegemony had crushed dozens of rebellions over the millennia. They all ended the same way, with the rebel species learning that resistance was futile. He would teach humanity this lesson personally. He ordered his fleet into battle formation. 3 dreadnoughts formed the center, their weapons already charging. The cruisers spread into flanking positions. The frigates moved forward as screening elements. This was standard hegemony doctrine, refined over 10,000 years of warfare. It had never failed. The human ship, which his computers identified as Indomitable, did not maneuver. It simply sat in space, pointing directly at his fleet. Zethrak studied its design through his view screen. The ship was ugly. All angles and flat surfaces covered in what appeared to be primitive armor plating. It looked like something from ancient history, before energy shields made armor obsolete. His tactical officer provided an analysis. The human vessel appeared to lack energy shielding entirely. Its weapons were unidentified but probably primitive plasma or missile systems. Recommended engagement range was 50,000 kilometers, well within the effective range of hegemony plasma batteries. Predicted outcome was destruction of the human vessel within minutes. Zethrak gave the order to advance. His fleet moved forward, shields at maximum strength. At 50,000 kilometers, he ordered weapons free. The dreadnoughts fired first. Brilliant lances of superheated plasma crossed the distance, each one carrying enough energy to vaporize a city. They struck Indomitable's hull dead center. The plasma splashed across the armor like water hitting a rock. The outer layers charred black. Metal glowed red. But the hull held. The plasma dissipated into space without penetrating. Zethrak leaned forward in his chair, suddenly paying much closer attention. That armor was far more effective than it should be. Indomitable did not return fire immediately. The ship continued its approach, closing the distance at a steady pace. 40,000 kilometers, 35,000. Zethrak ordered continuous fire. All 3 dreadnoughts poured plasma into the human ship. The cruisers added their weapons. Space lit up with energy discharge. The armor continued to hold. Sections of hull glowed white-hot but did not fail. Zethrak began to feel the first hints of real concern. This ship should have been destroyed by now. Instead, it kept coming, shrugging off firepower that would have gutted any other vessel he had ever faced. At 30,000 kilometers, Indomitable opened fire. The weapons were unlike anything Zethrak had seen. No plasma, no energy beams, just physical projectiles moving at incomprehensible speeds. His sensors barely registered them before they hit. The first railgun slug struck Eternal Judgment amidships. The energy shield did almost nothing. The projectile was solid matter, not energy, and it was moving at 3% light speed. It punched through the shield like paper, through the outer hull, through 3 interior decks, and out the stern. The impact lasted microseconds. The damage was catastrophic. Alarms screamed across Eternal Judgment's bridge. Atmosphere vented from a dozen breached compartments. Crew members died instantly in the depressurization. Zethrak's ship was actually wounded by a species the hegemony had dismissed as primitives. He stared at the damage reports in shock. More railgun fire followed. The other 2 dreadnoughts took hits. One of them lost its main reactor. The frigate screen tried to scatter, but Indomitable's point defense systems tracked them with perfect accuracy. Clouds of tungsten flechettes filled the space between ships. The small vessels flew directly into the kill zones. 4 frigates were shredded in seconds, their thin hulls no match for millions of high-velocity fragments. The cruisers attempted to flank, but missiles launched from Indomitable intercepted them. Each warhead released more flechette clouds before reaching point defense range. 2 cruisers were destroyed outright. The others were badly damaged. Zethrak's certainty crumbled into horror. His fleet was being destroyed, not gradually worn down in a battle of attrition, but systematically dismantled by weapons his shields could not stop. The humans had studied hegemony tactics and designed counters for everything. This was not a lucky victory. This was calculated annihilation. He gave the order to retreat. The surviving ships turned and accelerated away at maximum thrust. Indomitable did not pursue. It simply stopped firing and held position, watching them flee. Zethrak activated his emergency beacon, sending a priority message to the nearest hegemony base. Earth was in rebellion. Immediate reinforcement required. As his damaged flagship limped away from the battle, Zethrak pulled up the casualty reports. 4 cruisers destroyed, 6 frigates gone, both other dreadnoughts crippled, nearly 3,000 crew dead, all from a single human vessel that they had expected to brush aside like an insect. The implications were staggering. On Indomitable's bridge, Admiral Chen watched the hegemony fleet retreat. Chief Engineer Webb stood beside her, his face showing the exhaustion of 3 years of brutal work. Chen activated the communications array and opened a channel on all hegemony frequencies. What she was about to say would be heard across the galaxy. She spoke clearly and without emotion. This was Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran United Fleet. Humanity was no longer a client species of the hegemony. They claimed full sovereignty over the Sol system and all human colony expeditions. The old treaty was void. Any attempt to enforce it through military force would be met with resistance. The message transmitted across space at light speed, reaching monitoring stations and relay satellites throughout the sector. Within hours, it would reach the hegemony capital. Within days, the entire galaxy would know. A client species had successfully defied the hegemony's military. The supposedly invincible fleet had been broken. Chen closed the channel and looked at her crew. They had trained for 3 years for a battle that lasted 17 minutes. But those 17 minutes had changed everything. The news spread through the galaxy at the speed of light, carried by communication relays and trade ships. Within a week, every major species had heard the story. Humanity, a client species barely 3 years into annexation, had defeated a hegemony patrol fleet. The details varied depending on who was telling the story, but the core facts remained constant. The hegemony had lost. On the hegemony capital world, emergency sessions of the council ran continuously. The High Chancellor stood before the assembled representatives and played the battle footage again. Some council members demanded immediate retaliation. A full battle fleet should be dispatched to Earth to crush this rebellion before it spread. Others urged caution. Perhaps negotiation would be wiser. The intelligence reports painted a troubling picture. Humanity had not built just one battleship. Reconnaissance drones detected multiple construction sites in the asteroid belt around Earth. At least 5 more vessels were under construction, possibly more. The humans were preparing for war on a scale that suggested they expected the hegemony to respond with overwhelming force. More concerning were the tactical analyses. Hegemony military theorists studied the battle recordings obsessively, trying to understand how their forces had been defeated so completely. The conclusions were uncomfortable. The humans had identified fundamental weaknesses in hegemony doctrine and exploited them ruthlessly. Energy shields were useless against kinetic weapons. Plasma weapons could not penetrate thick armor. Point defense systems failed against saturation attacks. The most disturbing aspect was how thoroughly the humans had studied their enemy. Every weapon system on Indomitable seemed designed specifically to counter hegemony capabilities. This was not the work of primitives stumbling into an accidental victory. This was calculated warfare by a species that understood violence at a fundamental level. The debates in the council chamber grew heated. Some representatives pointed out that military retaliation might fail. If the hegemony sent a larger fleet and lost again, their credibility would be completely destroyed. Other client species would see that rebellion was not only possible, but potentially successful. The entire structure of the empire could collapse. Others argued that showing weakness was equally dangerous. If the hegemony negotiated with humanity after their military defeat, it would send a message that armed resistance was the path to independence. Dozens of client species might attempt similar rebellions. The hegemony would face wars on multiple fronts simultaneously. While the council debated, Ambassador Vexthor requested permission to return to Earth. He had dealt with the humans before. He understood their psychology better than most hegemony officials. Perhaps he could find a diplomatic solution that would satisfy both sides. After heated discussion, the council approved his mission, but they made clear that he was not authorized to make concessions. Vexthor's ship approached the Sol system 3 months after the battle. He transmitted his intentions ahead of time. This was a diplomatic mission, not a military one. He requested a meeting with Admiral Chen to discuss revised terms of partnership. The response came quickly. Chen would meet him aboard Indomitable. He was welcome to bring a small security detail. The shuttle flight from his ship to the human battleship took an hour. Vexthor spent the time reviewing his notes on human psychology. They were a competitive species, driven by notions of freedom and independence, but they were also pragmatic. They understood that total war with the hegemony would be devastating for both sides. There had to be common ground. Indomitable loomed larger as they approached. Up close, the battleship was even more intimidating. The hull was scarred from the recent battle, though repair crews were already working on the damaged sections. The ship dwarfed his diplomatic vessel. Vexthor felt a moment of unease. This was not how meetings with client species were supposed to go. Admiral Chen met him in a conference room deep inside the ship. She wore a simple uniform with no decorations except rank insignia. 2 guards stood by the door, armed but not threatening. Chen gestured to a seat across from her. Vexthor sat down and began his prepared speech about finding mutually beneficial arrangements. Chen let him finish, then laid out humanity's terms. First, the old treaty was null and void. Second, humanity claimed complete sovereignty over all systems settled by humans. Third, the hegemony would recognize Earth as an independent state with full membership rights in the galactic community. Fourth, all restrictions on human military development were removed. Vexthor listened with growing dismay. These were not negotiating positions. These were demands. He explained carefully that the Council would never accept such terms. The hegemony did not negotiate with rebellious client species. Chen nodded as if she had expected this response. Then she offered to show him something. She led him through Indomitable's corridors to an observation deck. Through the armored windows, Vexthor could see space, but Chen directed his attention to the tactical display. It showed the inner solar system, marked with dozens of icons. Each icon represented a human military installation, orbital forts around Earth, weapons platforms in the asteroid belt, more battleships under construction. Chen explained the situation calmly. Humanity had spent 3 years building one battleship in secret. Now that they no longer needed secrecy, construction would accelerate dramatically. Within 2 years, Earth would have a fleet of 20 battleships. Within 5 years, 50. The hegemony could send more fleets to destroy them, but each battle would cost both sides heavily. She walked to the window and looked out at the stars. Humanity did not want war with the hegemony, she said, but they would not live as subjects. The choice was simple. The hegemony could recognize human independence and maintain peaceful relations, or they could fight a war that would devastate both civilizations and benefit neither. Vexthor asked what would happen to other client species if humanity gained independence. Would the hegemony be expected to grant everyone the same freedoms? Chen turned to face him. That was between the hegemony and those species. Humanity was only concerned with their own freedom, but she acknowledged that their example might inspire others. The ambassador returned to his ship with much to consider. He transmitted his report to the Council that evening. The humans were serious. They were prepared for a long war if necessary, but they were also willing to coexist peacefully if the hegemony would recognize their sovereignty. The decision now rested with the Council. While the hegemony deliberated, the rest of the galaxy watched with intense interest. On the far rim, leaders of the Kryn Rebellion sent a coded message to Earth. They congratulated humanity on their victory and requested a meeting to discuss matters of mutual interest. Other suppressed species sent similar messages, more cautious but equally curious. Chen read each message carefully. Some were obviously fishing for military technology. Others seemed genuinely interested in coordinating resistance against the hegemony. She responded cautiously, committing to nothing but leaving doors open. Humanity needed allies, but they had to be careful about which alliances they formed. 6 weeks after Vexthor's visit, the Hegemony Council reached their decision. They would recognize human independence. A new treaty would be drafted, one that treated humanity as an equal partner rather than a subject species. In exchange, humanity would agree not to provide military technology to other client species and would maintain peaceful relations with the hegemony. The announcement sent shockwaves through the galactic community. The hegemony had backed down. After 10,000 years of unquestioned dominance, they had negotiated with a rebellious species instead of crushing them. The implications were staggering. If humanity could win their freedom, perhaps others could too. Chen accepted the Council's terms with one modification. Humanity would not actively provide military technology to other species, but they would not prevent the spread of information either. If others wanted to learn from human example, that was their choice. The hegemony reluctantly agreed. They had little leverage to demand more. The new treaty was signed aboard a neutral station, witnessed by representatives from dozens of species. Chen signed for humanity. The High Chancellor signed for the hegemony. When it was done, both sides shook hands for the cameras. The gesture was symbolic, but symbols mattered. The galaxy was watching. That evening, Chen returned to Indomitable. Chief Engineer Webb was waiting on the bridge with a bottle of Earth whiskey he had been saving for 3 years. They poured 2 glasses and drank in silence, watching the stars through the view screen. They had won humanity's freedom, but Chen knew this was just the beginning. The real challenge would be keeping it. 2 years after the treaty signing, the galaxy looked different. Humanity had established diplomatic relations with 47 species, opened trade routes through 6 sectors, and built a fleet of 18 battleships. Earth's orbital space was crowded with construction platforms, shipyards, and defense stations. The Sol system had become one of the most heavily fortified locations in known space. Admiral Chen stood in the observation deck of the new Earth Defense Command Station and watched the activity. Supply ships moved between stations. Patrol craft conducted training exercises. In the distance, the latest battleship was undergoing final systems checks before joining the fleet. Humanity had transformed from a subject species into a military power in less than 5 years. But the transformation came with complications. Other species watched humanity's success and began asking dangerous questions. If one species could break free from the hegemony through military strength, why not others? The questions became movements. The movements became rebellions. Within a year of the treaty, 3 client species attempted to follow humanity's example. 2 of those rebellions failed. The species involved had not prepared as thoroughly as humanity. They built ships quickly but poorly. They fought the hegemony using conventional tactics that played to hegemony strengths. Their fleets were destroyed, their worlds occupied, and their leaders executed as examples. The hegemony wanted to send a clear message. Humanity's success was an exception, not a template. But the third rebellion succeeded. The Kryn had been fighting the hegemony for decades before humanity even reached space. They had learned through bitter experience how to survive against superior forces. When they saw humanity's tactics, they adapted them immediately. Thick armor replaced energy shields. Kinetic weapons replaced plasma. Their fleet became a mirror of humanity's approach. The Kryn victory came at enormous cost. Half their worlds were devastated. Billions died in the fighting. But they won their independence. The hegemony fleet sent to crush them was defeated in a brutal engagement that lasted 3 days. When the surviving hegemony ships retreated, the Kryn sent a message to Earth. They thanked humanity for showing them the way. Chen read the message with mixed feelings. Humanity had inspired the Kryn rebellion, but they had not caused it. The Kryn had been fighting for freedom long before humans knew aliens existed. Still, the hegemony would see connections. They would blame humanity for destabilizing their empire. Relations between Earth and the hegemony capital grew strained. Ambassador Vexthor returned to Earth 6 months after the Kryn victory. His message from the Council was blunt. Humanity had agreed not to provide military technology to other species. Yet their example was spreading. If more rebellions succeeded, the hegemony would hold Earth responsible. There would be consequences. Chen met with him in her office, a small room with a view of Earth hanging blue and white against the black. She listened to his concerns patiently, then offered her response. Humanity had kept the letter of their agreement. They had not provided weapons or technology to anyone. They could not control what others learned by observation. Vexthor argued that humanity had a moral responsibility to discourage other rebellions. The wars were causing massive loss of life. Entire civilizations were being destroyed. Surely humanity did not want that blood on their hands. Chen acknowledged the tragedy but asked a pointed question. Was the solution for species to accept permanent subjugation? To never fight for their freedom? The ambassador had no good answer. The conversation ended inconclusively. After he left, Chen sat alone in her office for a long time, thinking about responsibility and consequences. Humanity had not started this wave of rebellions, but their success had certainly encouraged it. The question was what to do about it. A proposal came from an unexpected source. The Kryn contacted Earth with an invitation to form a defensive alliance. Other free species could join as well, creating a coalition strong enough to deter hegemony aggression without requiring constant warfare. The alliance would share defensive technology and coordinate military responses to threats. Chen brought the proposal to Earth's government. The debates were intense. Some argued that joining an alliance against the hegemony would inevitably lead to war. Others countered that remaining isolated made humanity vulnerable. If the hegemony decided to make an example of Earth, humanity would face their entire military alone. The vote was close, but Earth agreed to join the alliance. The announcement sent another shock through the galaxy. The Free Worlds Coalition, as they called themselves, consisted of 5 species who had successfully won independence from the hegemony. Together, their combined fleets numbered over 100 battleships and countless smaller vessels. The Hegemony Council watched these developments with growing alarm. Their empire, stable for 10,000 years, was fracturing. Client species were openly discussing independence. Trade routes were disrupted by conflicts. The military was stretched thin, dealing with multiple rebellions simultaneously. Something had to change. The change came from an unexpected direction. A faction within the council proposed reform instead of repression. Perhaps the old system was unsustainable. Perhaps client species should be given more autonomy, more representation, real voices in galactic governance. It was radical thinking from an institution that had not changed its basic structure in millennia. The High Chancellor called for a vote. The chamber divided almost evenly. In the end, reform won by a narrow margin. The hegemony announced the formation of a new galactic assembly, where all species would have representation. Client species would retain more of their resources and have greater say in laws affecting them. Military restrictions would be eased. The announcement was met with skepticism by many. Would the hegemony truly share power? Or was this just a ploy to quiet the rebellions? Time would tell. But it was a start. Chen watched the news broadcast with cautious optimism. Maybe the galaxy was finally beginning to change for the better. On a warm evening 3 years after Indomitable's first battle, Chen returned to the forge. The asteroid facility was being converted into a memorial and museum. The massive construction bays where humanity's first battleship was built would be preserved for future generations, a reminder of what determination and ingenuity could achieve. Chief Engineer Webb met her there. He had retired from active service but still consulted on new ship designs. Together they walked through the empty bays, their footsteps echoing in the vast space. Webb pointed out where different sections of Indomitable had been assembled. Chen listened, remembering the desperate gamble they had taken. They stood finally in the main assembly bay where Indomitable had taken her first power readings. The ship herself was in orbit around Earth now, a flagship of the Free Worlds Coalition fleet. But her spirit remained here in this hollowed asteroid where humanity had dared to challenge an empire that had ruled for 10,000 years. Webb asked Chen if she thought they had done the right thing. The rebellions their success inspired had cost millions of lives. The galaxy was less stable now than before. Chen considered the question carefully before answering. Freedom, she said, was never free. The cost was always high. But the alternative was to live forever as subjects, hoping someone else would grant them rights they could only win for themselves. They left the forge as the memorial lights came on, illuminating the vast chamber. Outside, stars filled the viewports. Somewhere out there, other species were fighting for their freedom. Some would succeed, others would fail. But they were fighting because they had seen that victory was possible. Humanity had shown them the way. The galactic hegemony would never be the same. Their absolute authority was broken. Their military superiority was questioned. Their political structure was reforming under pressure from below. And it had all begun on one day when they stared in horror at the birth of humanity's first battleship and realized the galaxy had changed forever. Chen returned to Earth that night. She stood on the balcony of her apartment and looked up at the stars. The same stars humans had dreamed about for millennia. Those dreams had carried them to space, to war, and finally to freedom. The future was uncertain. There would be more challenges, more conflicts, more difficult choices, but humanity would face them as equals, not subjects. That was worth everything they had risked, everything they had sacrificed, everything they had fought for. In the end, freedom was not granted by others. It was taken by those brave enough to reach for it and strong enough to hold it. Humanity had reached, they had held, and they would never let go.